All right, let's dive in. We're tackling skin in the game this time, and you've given me a ton of material, mostly focused on Nassim Taleb's book and that Google talk he did.
Well, it's clear you're fascinated by how risk and responsibility really shape how we understand things and make decisions. It's a thread that runs through everything you sent over.
Definitely. We've got excerpts from Taleb's talk, a summary video, even some insights on how religions have dealt with similar ideas.
Oh, wow.
This deep dive is all about figuring out how having something to lose changes the game entirely.
Yeah, at the heart of it is Taleb's idea, skin in the game. He argues that real knowledge and systems that actually work come from having something at stake, from facing the potential downsides of your choices.
He uses pretty interesting method to make sure his own writing stays relevant, something he calls the Lindy effect.
hmm
Could you break that down a bit?
The Lindy effect basically says that the longer something's been around, like an idea, technology, a book, whatever, the longer it's likely to keep surviving. So Taleb uses this in his writing by focusing on ideas and language that would have been understandable decades ago,
Hmm.
which helps ensure his work stays relevant for years to come.
So it's like timeless wisdom has a built-in advantage.
Yeah.
But how does this connect to making better decisions in our own lives?
Think of it this way. How can you use the Lindy effect to filter information? By looking for knowledge that has withstood the test of time.
Okay.
If something has survived for centuries, chances are it holds some valuable insights.
That's a great point. It
Yeah.
reminds me of another idea he talks about, the ludic fallacy, which warns us about applying the logic of games to real life.
Exactly. Taleb points out that real-world risk is far messier and unpredictable.
Yeah.
It's full of hidden consequences that theoretical models often miss.
He uses the story of a trader who lost a fortune despite seemingly knowing everything about the lumber market.
Yeah.
What was that about?
That's the green lumber trader. This guy was considered an expert, but his downfall highlights how real-world experience often leads to a different kind of knowledge, the kind you can't get from textbooks alone.
Right.
It's about understanding the nuances, the things you only learn by being in the trenches.
It makes me think about how AI and machine learning are developed,
Yeah.
where they learn from data rather than just relying on preconceived notions.
That's a great connection.
Yeah.
Taleb seems to be suggesting we need to go beyond just theoretical knowledge and embrace understanding that comes from experience, from actually having skin in the game.
And I think a great example of what not to do is what he calls the Bob Rubin trade.
Okay.
Can you tell us more about that?
Taleb uses Bob Rubin trade to describe situations where rewards and risks are totally out of whack.
Right.
And he uses Bob Rubin, the former Citigroup executive, as an example.
Yeah.
Rubin earned a massive compensation but faced no real consequences when the 2008 financial crisis hit.
If I remember correctly, Rubin even called it an unpredictable black swan event, which seems a bit convenient.
Exactly. Taleb is highlighting how Rubin profited immensely during the good times, but when things went south, it was others who paid the price.
Right.
This lack of symmetry between risk and reward really bothered him. He contrasts it with ancient systems like Hammurabi's Code, where builders faced severe penalties, even death, for shoddy work that led to harm.
Wow, that's intense. But I guess it definitely made sure builders had skin in the game.
It did. And the point is that this ancient code understood the importance of aligning incentives.
Right.
It created a system where people were directly accountable for their actions, which Taleb argues is crucial for any functional society.
So accountability, this direct link between actions and consequences, is a key theme here.
Definitely.
But how does Taleb differentiate between true experts and what he calls pseudo-experts?
He argues that true experts like pilots, surgeons, or plumbers face immediate and often severe consequences for being wrong.
It's like a natural selection process. Incompetence gets weeded out quickly.
Yeah, but pseudo-experts, often found in academia or policymaking, often lack this direct connection to reality.
Okay.
They can promote ideas with little or no skin in the game, which can lead to some really bad outcomes.
It reminds me of the debates surrounding the Iraq War, where those who advocated for intervention didn't necessarily face the same level of consequences as those on the ground.
Exactly. Taleb is really critical of these so-called interventionistas who advocate for drastic measures from afar without experiencing the consequences themselves.
He seems to be calling for more accountability, especially for those in positions of power.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think accountability is absolutely crucial, especially when the stakes are so high. It's closely tied to Taleb's view on risk as a form of virtue,
Okay.
which might sound a little counterintuitive.
I was just thinking that. How can taking risks be a virtue?
Right. It seems like something to avoid. But Taleb argues that putting yourself at risk throughout history has signaled courage and commitment. He contrasts this with modern-day warmongers who make decisions from a safe distance, never facing the heat themselves.
He even draws a parallel to religious figures, like with a deity sacrificing themselves. It demonstrates skin in the game,
Right.
raises the stakes, adds a layer of authenticity to the message.
Right. And he's not just talking the talk.
Right.
Taleb himself uses risk-taking, like publicly criticizing people in his books,
Oh, yeah.
as a way to signal his commitment to his own ideas. Like he's saying, I believe in this enough to put my own neck on the line.
That's a bold move.
Mm.
Aligns with his whole philosophy. But switching gears a bit,
Sure.
Taleb also has some interesting views on inequality.
Absolutely. He challenges the typical static view of inequality, arguing that we should be more concerned with the dynamics of wealth creation and destruction. He actually prefers systems with high bankruptcy rates, where those at the top can fall just as quickly as they rise.
So it's less about everyone being equal and more about making sure those at the top got there through genuine effort and risk-taking,
Right.
and that they can lose their position just as easily.
Exactly. He argues that inequality is more tolerable if those at the top got there by taking risks and can lose their position just as easily. It creates a more dynamic and, in a sense, fairer system.
Yeah.
But moving back to ethics for a moment,
Yeah.
how do you think this skin-in-the-game concept plays out in our ethical and social systems?
That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
I think it's easy to talk about doing the right thing,
Yeah.
but it's much harder to actually do it, especially when there's a personal cost involved.
Taleb would agree with you there.
Okay.
He's critical of what he calls virtue signaling, people who make a big show of their supposed morality,
Right.
but avoid any real sacrifice or risk. He uses that example of hotels urging guests to reuse towels to save the planet,
Yeah.
finding it more genuine when they simply say it helps their bottom line. It cuts through all that self-righteousness.
So for Taleb, true virtue isn't about making a grand display.
Yeah.
It's about quietly doing what's right, even when it's difficult or unpopular.
Exactly.
But how does he apply skin in the game to the concept of rationality? It seems like a bit of a stretch.
It might seem that way, but Taleb argues that what we often consider rational is heavily influenced by the absence of real-world consequences.
Okay.
He points out that many academics can promote ideas that sound logical in theory, but they never have to face the repercussions if those ideas turn out to be harmful.
So he called these decorative beliefs.
Right.
Beliefs that crumble when they meet the complexities of real life.
Exactly. So for Taleb, true rationality is less about abstract logic and more about making decisions that help you survive and thrive in a world full of uncertainty and risk.
So it's a very pragmatic view of rationality.
Yeah.
But what about this concept of ergodicity that he mentions? That one always trips me up.
It is a bit technical, but at its core, ergodicity is about understanding the difference between what's true for a group versus what's true for an individual over time.
Okay.
And Taleb argues that many models of risk in decision-making don't account for this difference, leading to some flawed conclusions.
He uses the example of Russian roulette to illustrate this point.
Exactly. From a group perspective, the odds might seem favorable.
Yeah?
5 out of 6 people survive each round.
Right.
But for any individual who keeps playing, well, it's only a matter of time before things go badly.
It's a good reminder that even when the odds seem good, repeatedly taking certain risks can be disastrous.
Yeah.
So how does this tie back into skin in the game?
Taleb argues that people who face the full consequences of their actions are more likely to make choices that help them and the systems they are a part of survive over the long term.
Okay.
It's about thinking beyond the immediate outcome and considering the cumulative impact of our decisions.
He also talks about this idea of mental accounting, which I've always heard is an error in thinking.
It is often considered a cognitive bias, but Taleb, as always, has a slightly different take on it.
Okay.
Mental accounting, you'll remember, is the tendency to treat money differently depending on its source or intended use.
Like, we might be more willing to spend money we won gambling than money we earned from our jobs, even though it's all the same money in the end.
Exactly. Traditional economic theory would say this is irrational, but Taleb argues that mental accounting can actually be a smart strategy for navigating risk.
Oh, okay.
He gives the example of gamblers who only increase their bets when they're ahead, essentially using their winnings, or house money, to take on more risk.
So they're protecting their initial capital, while using profits to explore more risky opportunities.
Precisely. And while this might seem counterintuitive, Taleb argues it's a surprisingly effective way to exploit favorable conditions while minimizing the risk of losing everything.
It sounds like he's encouraging us to rethink what we consider rational behavior, to look at things from a more practical, real-world perspective.
He is.
Yeah.
He's constantly pushing us to question conventional wisdom and to think about the world in a more nuanced way.
And speaking of pushing back against conventional wisdom, he also revisits the concept of virtue, this time applying it to societies and systems.
Yes. Taleb is quite critical of what he sees as modern virtue signaling, especially among those he calls IYIs, intellectuals who promote trendy causes, but without any real skin in the game.
He argues that true virtue is often unpopular, even dangerous, because it means going against the grain and putting yourself at risk.
Right.
He contrasts this with the modern focus on safe spaces and political correctness, which he sees as attempts to shield ourselves from discomfort and difficult conversations.
Yeah.
He believes that real growth, both individually and societally, comes from embracing challenge and risk, not from hiding from them.
Absolutely.
He even suggests that some global conflicts, like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, might be made worse by interventions from outsiders who impose abstract solutions, but without having to live with the consequences. He seems to believe that lasting solutions are more likely to come from within, from people who have a direct stake in the outcome.
Absolutely. That's a core theme running through all of his work. And it brings us back to his fundamental argument that skin in the game is essential for knowledge, for effective systems, for ethical behavior, and ultimately for our survival.
It's a thought-provoking concept that really makes you look at the world differently.
It does. It
Yeah.
challenges us to question our assumptions and to think more critically about how we make decisions, both as individuals and as a society.
Taleb also shared some pretty interesting observations about how we view history and religion.
Yeah.
Can you talk more about that?
He challenges the traditional view of history, arguing that we tend to focus too much on the dramatic and destructive events, like wars and conflicts.
Okay.
He uses his own experience on a safari in South Africa as an example.
I remember that story.
Yeah,
He went hoping to see lions, but mostly encountered peaceful herbivores.
right. And he suggests this is a metaphor for history itself.
Oh.
We tend to overemphasize the violent and disruptive events while overlooking the long periods of peace and cooperation that have actually shaped our world.
It's like we gravitate towards the exciting parts of the story,
Yeah.
even if they don't represent the whole picture.
He criticizes historians and international relations experts for perpetuating this distorted view, arguing that they often lack skin in the game because they are analyzing events from a distance.
He also questions the way we talk about religion, claiming that the word itself has become so muddled that it's hard to even have a meaningful conversation about it.
He's right.
Yeah.
The word religion has taken on so many different meanings over time.
Right.
For some, like early Jews and Muslims, religion was basically law. For others, like the Romans, it was more about social rituals and festivals.
And for early Christians, it was mostly about spiritual matters,
Yeah.
separate from law and politics.
Exactly. So Taleb argues that we need to be more precise in our language and recognize the many ways belief systems operate and how they've evolved.
He even suggests that some belief systems, like Salafism, act more as political ideologies than religions in the traditional sense.
It's an important distinction.
Right.
He's urging us to look beyond the labels and examine the underlying dynamics of how beliefs are held and how they influence behavior.
It all circles back to skin in the game.
Yeah.
Taleb seems to be saying that true belief is demonstrated through actions and sacrifices, not just empty words.
He uses the example of the Pope receiving medical care,
Oh.
pointing out that even the most devout religious leaders rely on modern science when their lives are at stake. It's a reminder that even the most deeply held beliefs are often tempered by practical realities.
It's fascinating how Taleb weaves together these seemingly disparate ideas about knowledge, risk, and belief.
Yeah.
He really challenges us to reconsider our assumptions about the world.
He does. He encourages us to move beyond abstract theories and engage with the world in a more grounded and pragmatic way, recognizing the importance of consequences, of accountability, and of having something to lose.
So what can we as individuals take away from all of this?
I think if we truly embrace Taleb's skin in the game concept, we need to be more aware of the hidden dynamics of risk and reward and how our choices affect others.
We should be cautious of those who claim expertise but lack practical experience,
Right.
and those who advocate for ideas but without facing the consequences if those ideas turn out to be wrong.
Absolutely. And maybe most importantly, we need to be more mindful of the choices we make, big or small, recognizing that every decision has a ripple effect, impacting not just ourselves, but the systems and communities we're a part of.
It's a powerful reminder that we are all interconnected and our actions have consequences that extend far beyond ourselves.
One final thought to ponder. If we really integrate this idea of skin in the game into our lives, how might it change the way we approach everything from education and politics to our personal relationships? It's a question worth exploring.
It's interesting how he brings up those peaceful herbivores on the safari. It's easy to get caught up in the drama and miss the bigger picture.
It is. It's a human tendency to focus on the flashy and exciting, even if it's not really representative.
Right.
Applies to a lot more than just history.
He even applies this thinking to religion.
Yeah.
I've always found it tricky to even define what religion is.
Taleb argues that the word religion is used so loosely it's lost all meaning. He points out that for some groups, like early Jews and Muslims, religion was basically synonymous with law. But for others, like the Romans, it was more about rituals and social gathering.
And for early Christians, it was primarily a spiritual pursuit, separate from law and politics.
Exactly.
So maybe we need to be more specific when we talk about different belief systems.
Precisely. We need to look beyond the labels and consider the underlying dynamics of how beliefs are held and how they influence behavior.
Okay.
And I think this ties back into skin in the game. Taleb suggests that true belief is demonstrated through actions and sacrifices, not just words.
He uses that thought-provoking example of the Pope receiving medical care. Even the most devout religious leaders rely on science when their lives are at stake.
It highlights that even the most deeply held beliefs are often tempered by practical realities.
Yeah.
We all want to survive and thrive regardless of our beliefs.
So thinking back to what we've discussed, it seems like Taleb is advocating for a more nuanced and pragmatic approach to understanding the world. He wants us to move away from abstract theories and engage with the world in a more grounded way.
He definitely emphasizes the importance of experience, consequences, and accountability.
Yeah.
It's not just about thinking the right thoughts. It's about making choices that align with your beliefs and then accepting the outcomes.
It's a challenging but ultimately empowering message.
It is.
It reminds us that we are all active participants in shaping the world around us.
And that every decision, no matter how small, has a ripple effect.
Right.
If we truly embrace the concept of skin in the game, it could transform the way we approach everything from education and politics to our personal relationships.
Food for thought indeed. This has been a really insightful deep dive into skin in the game. I feel like I have a much deeper understanding of Taleb's ideas and how they can be applied to my own life.
It's been a pleasure unpacking this with you.
Likewise.
And remember, the real learning begins when you start applying these ideas to your own decisions and interactions.
Absolutely.